Okay, welcome to the latest episode of PhD-Politico Discussions. I'm really excited today to be joined by the head of news and politics at joe.co.uk, Oli Dugmore. Hi, Oli. How are you?
Hey, yeah, hey Adam. I'm good, thank you. Yourself?
Yeah, well, as good as can be given the current circumstances. So
Absolutely.
I really want to start. How did you first become interested in politics? What was it that interested you?
Well, I guess like most people, you're one of the big influences you draw on is your teachers at school, and I was very lucky to have a fantastic politics teacher, John Jeffries, who showed me a film called Taking Liberties. Which was about the sort of encroachment upon civil liberties by the new Labour government, Tony Blair. Then that combined with, and then also actually we went on a school trip to hear Tony Benn speak, which I found very revealing. And then also as well, I was at school just before, it was coalition years, and it was just before the fee increase. And the Lib Dems sort of were swept into Downing Street, admittedly, albeit by coalition, but reneged on their promise. And I wasn't old enough to vote. However, I knew people that were, and they voted for the Lib Dems on the basis that they were going to eliminate tuition fees. And they didn't. They did the opposite. And that sort of created a pretty strong reaction in me. Probably the only time the Lib Dems can ever be credited with making anyone feel something. And I went to the protest, the marches. I was at Millbank when the sort of split away protest stormed the Tory party headquarters, and that left a pretty big mark on me, and sort of started me on my path, my journey towards being where I am now.
That's really interesting. Actually, it's funny you said the 2010 general election is really the first one I remember. I think I was 13 at the time, so it's the first time I remember the debates, especially the Clegg Brown Cameron debates. Obviously, the first time I really watched politics on TV, and it actually started to interest me.
So I agree with Nick, wasn't it? That's the way I feel. Saying I agree with Nick. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow. It's incredible to think that's only 11 years ago. How much has changed since? So obviously you decided to go into journalism. Of all the different areas of political life, why was it journalism? Why particular video journalism? What was it about that interested you?
I've always enjoyed journalism. I started a newspaper at school, sixth form newspaper at school. I actually initially wanted to be a photojournalist, but it transpired that whilst I sort of enjoyed prattling around with a DSLR camera, I don't think I was going to be going off to Afghanistan. It would have been at that time, or anything like that. I suppose there's a translation there to what I do now. I just enjoyed it. I liked, I suppose the ideals of it probably appeal to you initially when you're that young, speaking truth to power and all that sort of stuff. But then I just sort of got addicted to it. I got hooked onto it. I wrote for the Tab at university. I was the editor of the Tab at Cardiff, and once people work in digital journalism, I don't know if they'd be able to speak to it as well, but you really do. And I deliberately use the word addiction to sort of watching, whether it's page views, video views, whatever, you do something and then watching it sort of spread across the internet. You do get hooked to that feeling. You get hooked to that feeling of creating stuff and people watching it and being able to see how many people are watching it and learning and informing, taking from that. And it becomes a pretty direct feedback loop. You figure out, if you do it, consistently, you can figure out quite quickly how to do it successfully and how to get people to share the stuff you're doing. And yeah, that probably started for me at uni, writing stuff on campus.
That's interesting. So you talked about ideals. What would you say? I mean, as a journalist at Joe, obviously working in that organisation, what would you say your role is? What do you see your role as, and what do you think your job is? If someone was to ask you what should you be doing as a journalist, what would you say the role of a journalist is, especially in the obviously political system?
Yeah. So, well, basically, I'm the political editor. So I'm largely responsible for any of the sort of political content we publish. in terms of what that practically means for me, it's often I like telling stories. I mean, that's in the most simplest form. That's what journalism is, right? Storytelling. And I like doing that in a way that sort of subverts current mediums, does it sort of does things in a way that I think, sort of the legacy publishers perhaps aren't doing very well, particularly actually because of the audience, Joe's audience. That's one of the things that actually drew me to it, which, for people who aren't familiar, it is young men. It's not to say I don't make content for women. My content's not gendered, but the audience, Joe's primary audience is male. And I think not necessarily men, but younger people certainly, I think, are neglected by the current news offering. Yeah. I think they're sort of unintentionally underserved at best and neglected at worst, not just in terms of the media, but also in terms of, politics and political parties. I guess with political parties, it's fairly self-explanatory why, and it's because young people don't really turn out in the same numbers as people who are older. So why would they expend their energy trying to get them to vote for them when, you're going to devise a successful strategy? You probably leave them alone. But I think that's a real shame. I think we owe it. I feel a sense of obligation, I guess, because I am the audience for those people to sort of be informed and to have an understanding of what's going on. And if I can contribute to that, then yeah, I definitely want to. In terms of what my sort of job at Joe therefore entails is, generally speaking, I like to get out of London. I like to try and stay away from interviewing politicians where possible. I mean, at the moment, because of coronavirus, obviously things have, as demonstrated by this Skype interview, I mean, there are real limitations to what you can do. And so I have been doing a lot of Skypes. I've been sat in this kitchen for nearly a year now. And, and that's really frustrating, particularly if the reason you got into the job is because you like talking to people and you like meeting new people every day. I think the restrictions, actually, the regulations at the moment, they do make exceptions for journalism right now. But things are way things are. I don't think anyone's particularly desperate to go out and be shooting video all the time. You really do have to pick it. And if there's a way you can do it remotely, then that's going to be the preference right now. So frustrating to not be able to get out and do the stuff that I like doing, which is, jumping on a train with a camera and finding a story to tell.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you, actually, about the idea of a lack of media for young people, especially in politics. I mean, as someone who watches Joe and watches the Joe Politics channel, especially, I mean, to be honest, there's not many better channels for appealing to young people, I must admit. So you speak to lots of politicians across the spectrum. I mean, you talked to Kit Malthousing a few weeks ago. You've spoken to people on the left like Owen Jones. You must sometimes speak to people you strongly disagree with, I'm sure. And maybe some people you don't particularly like. Obviously, you don't have to say any names, that's fine. But how challenging is it to how challenging is it to find a balance between where you want to let everyone give their opinion, you want to obviously respect everyone's opinion, but also there obviously must be some opinions you think that's complete nonsense, that's complete rubbish. How difficult is it to find that balance?
I don't actually feel that way. And I actually find it very easy to let people speak. I mean, so there's a lot to say there. Okay. First things first, I'm still quite young and I don't have a certain way in which I view the world. I'm not dogmatic. I don't think that, so-and-so is the be all and end all of when it comes to, whatever political position it is. I actually think there's I think you can take something from pretty much what anyone ever thinks. Also, I don't have formal, broadcast journalism training. I sort of ended up doing what I'm doing. I sort of via work. I didn't study it, so I've always adopted quite a conversational style anyway in the way I approach interviewing people. Not least because I find that more interesting and illuminating. Yeah. But also as a product of trying to create a distinct media offering, because it's to our advantage to do things differently. And let's be honest, the majority of the way you see politicians interacting with journalists these days is in a confrontational, adversarial interview. And yeah, that's, that serves a purpose. I actually really quite enjoy watching Piers Morgan shouting at government ministers. It's entertaining. It's good TV. And I think it definitely serves a purpose as well within our sort of media political ecosystem. But I also think there is 100% more space for, more thought out, long drawn, discussion and debate. And if you're on digital, you are not bound by, okay, we've got an ad break in 10 minutes. So that's how long we've got the minister for. Yeah. I mean, really, there is no bounds to how long. It's their diary. It's how much time they're going to give you. And I've done interviews with people like Slavoj Zizek, for example, which run over an hour. Same with Douglas Murray. Those kind of guys, they will give you the time because that's sort of their speciality, is their sort of YouTube diatribe. Particularly with Zizek, actually, because I think over the space of that hour and a half, I asked him about 4 or 5 questions, and he just spoke for the rest of it. But yeah, sometimes people say stuff I don't agree with, but that doesn't enrage me. I like listening to people that think about things differently to me, because it informs my own thinking. Even if it's just to the point of, okay, well, that's wrong because of X, Y, or Z. That's still to your benefit because it sharpens your critical thinking. Or if it's something you disagree with but you can't figure out why, well, then that's the golden ticket, because you're then, you have to go away and you have to think about it, and you have to try to understand if it's not immediately obvious. What is it about this position that you disagree with? Why is it? Can you put your finger on it? If not, you need to read more. You need to figure out why. Or if it's just a gut reaction, maybe actually there is some strength. There is some validity to their position, and you owe it to that person to consider it.
That's really interesting. Obviously, there's a lot of talk around the idea of fake news and the idea that people make claims that aren't true. So how how important is it? Obviously you say you like to give, and I agree with what you're saying. I think it's very important that everyone give their opinion, be very open to different opinions. I always like to make sure I am, especially on Twitter. I like to follow a wide range of different political views to make sure I get the whole shebang. But how important is it to make sure that obviously outrageous lies just aren't reported, like things like, for example, with COVID at the moment, there's lots of lies out there, lots of disinformation. How important is it as journalists to make sure that you don't let disinformation get out?
Yeah, obviously it's hugely important. You have responsibility. It's actually one of the benefits, again, of being digital, is that we actually don't do very much live. On Politics Joe, we were live. We did a few live things during the election. So on election night, for example. Yeah. Also on in that campaign, and there's been a few other times, but within reason, most of the time, to be honest with you, we're not just putting stuff out. We're not. Yeah. So that provides us the time to, if there is stuff we're skeptical of, we can fact check it. If it's wrong, then we can either include a correction, clarification, or cut it out. There's all sorts of things you can do. Or obviously it's on you as the interviewer. The primary responsibility is on you to be able to be knowledgeable enough to be able to challenge someone. But if you miss something, and I'm not trying to blow my own trumpet, but it's hard. It's hard to be listening to what someone's saying and thinking it through, as well as preparing for what you're going to ask them next. And obviously everyone's human. You're going to miss stuff. Stuff's going to get past you, or you're going to say something that you yourself could even if you choose your words in the incorrect fashion, you could end up saying something that is untrue, and obviously that's worst case scenario. But again, by the fact we're not live, you are afforded the space to be able to correct those errors. Obviously truth and objective truth is enormously important to journalism. It's what we're in the business of.
So looking at the current British political sphere, I want to talk about the Brexit process first, if that's all right. That period between 2016 and 2019, where obviously we had the referendum result, and then there was this sort of uncertainty, this sort of battle between the Leavers and the Remainers, and I felt that we became, it became a very divisive process. I feel society became much more divided, and I'm wondering, obviously, as someone who was in that sphere, was obviously talking to people on both sides, did you feel that divide? How strong was that divide for you?
Visceral. Yeah, it was visceral. Yeah, I mean, you don't. People have been talking about the sort of the riot on at the Capitol in the United States. I mean, like, you know, how horrendous America's fallen so far, and it's sort of, I feel like it neglects to mention the fact that you know, an MP was killed by a member of the far right in this country in 2016. There was actually a second plot, again by the far right, again to kill actually a Labour MP, a female Labour MP, that was only foiled because someone in that group, if you like, turned and informed the police. It's definitely present. I don't know if you've ever been if you were ever around sort of the House of Commons during that period of time, but
I I interviewed Tom Brake for my master's dissertation. It was on Scottish independence, weirdly, but obviously I was on Capitol Hill. It was actually the day of the it was one of the big votes. I think it was the day Theresa May's deal got completely. I think it was abolished. It was completely destroyed. It was a record defeat. And obviously on Parliament Hill, you had I think there was a vote leave bus, or leave means leave bus, and there was obviously the blokes with the Union Jacks, and you had the blokes with the European flag suits, and it was quite unique atmosphere.
Yeah. I mean, it's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it's really good to see a high level of political engagement in the country. On the other hand, I think you struggle to make an argument for polarization being like a positive force.
Yeah.
You know. Great. Okay, to put it into, you know, to peg it on something that's happened recently. Look at this EU vaccine debacle, right? The way the Commission's absolutely flopped. That, you know, potentially invoking Article 16 of the Northern Ireland Protocol and they were saying that they were going to stop sort of the delivery of the vaccine across the border on the island of Ireland. Now, you cannot look at that. I mean, there's no way you can look at that and say, the EU is this sort of shining city on a hill. There's no way. Like, you just can't. It's like it's totally. And yet, people still manage to and be like, oh, you know, it's just a minor thing. And
trying to sort of justify it, trying to quantify it, sort of.
And it speaks to the debate and the political polarization, as we just said, over the last 5 years, that we've gone from the EU being this thing that really was basically just the subject of fringe conversations, you know, in the far corners of pubs or wherever Nigel Farage was, and certain aspects of the Conservative Party, but was by no means sort of mainstream political debate, to one half of the country thinking that the EU is literally like the second coming of Christ, and the other half thinking of it as this sort of like Machiavellian, horrific, supranational, and it's just, you know, it's just an intergovernmental body. It's like it's a federalist project. I think that tells you that. I think that speaks to sort of where we've ended up.
I was going to ask you about, now we are, I guess, officially, we are now in the post-Brexit world. I'm assuming, based on what you've just said, you don't see that divide coming together anytime soon.
You know what? I actually think it could, mainly because the battle's been lost or won, depending on your perspective, and because of that, you know, there's then. It recedes, and that, you know, certain battles have been lost. I mean, there's no two ways to look at it. You have to look at this now as an opportunity, like that. I mean, unless you're so bitter about 2016 that you would rather see like the UK become a failed state. You have to treat it as an opportunity, and there is the realistic prospect of the collapse of the union in the next few years. Don't get me wrong. So maybe being a failed state is still a possibility, but you know, I think one thing the coronavirus has really highlighted is that essentially the British state is not fit for purpose. You know, whether it's Whitehall and the civil service, which is something that, you know, Dominic Cummings spoke about at length. And sort of was his grand project, but you know, he ended up being consumed by the machine and spat out again. But you know, if you can see anything, you know, there's 100,000 dead Brits because of this virus, and it doesn't. There's no that you can't spin that. There isn't. oh yeah, the UK is an international travel hub, so what do you expect? Like 100,000 people are going to die. It doesn't matter. It doesn't compute. It's like I suppose it poses fundamental questions about the purpose of state. Is it to protect its citizens, or is it sort of, you take that Thatcherite sort of 1980s view that actually this is the state's role to basically sort of facilitate and protect rights.
Yeah.
I guess you would say, I would probably counter that by saying that one of those rights is the right to safety, is the right to live a safe life. But if that's the purpose of the state, then there's no question that it's failed in that role. You can talk about all sorts of reasons for the high death toll we have, whether it's government misgovernance by the Conservative Party. I think there's been an element of that. I don't think it's totally down to that. I think you can't overlook the fact that we've become an incredibly sedentary population. We're an incredibly obese population, which we know is a comorbidity for COVID.
Yeah.
There's a really good piece in Unheard about sort of I think it compared the British state to like a dodo, basically, in comparison to sort of these particularly Southeast Asian countries, but basically other countries that were largely, they sort of had the ability to mobilize and were sort of semi on a war footing because of the lack of security in the region that they're based in, and because of that, their state, the sort of the wider apparatus of the nation, if you would, are much more nimble, much more agile, and they're able to adapt to problems. And to use Cummings' parlance, the UK has the blob. And how does that respond and shift and manage what's happening? Well, not particularly well.
I do want to talk about COVID more, but first I would love to talk about the United States, because you were obviously there for the election. And I think it's fair to say it's probably, with Britain, probably the most divided English-speaking country on the planet still, I think. So yes, as I said, you went to the United States, you covered the election. How was that experience? Just try to sum that up for me, what that experience was like.
Brilliant. I mean, from a personal and professional perspective, anyway. I mean, being on the ground in America to cover an American election, it's sort of, it's what dreams are made of, and particularly by virtue of us being a small company and being able to dictate and decide these are the stories we want to cover, versus if you're part of the BBC or whatever and you're just following the campaign. And we got to do a sort of a trip through the American South, which was from a personal perspective, I'd never spent an extended period of time in America before. I fell in love with the country a little bit, to be honest with you. It's really difficult to talk about, because obviously it's essentially every aspect of it has been written about, that you cannot talk about it without it being a cliche. And when people say that, America is a freeway, is a highway, they're correct. Everything is just a road off, and then it's a big long motorway, and that motorway will literally take you from Mexico to Canada, and it's just off in either direction. When they say that everything in America is supersized, that's also true. It's just that everything is bigger, everything is better, it's polished. The sort of the culture and the glisten of it it's almost irresistible. And I really actually began to empathize with people. We've all seen the videos of like journalists asking Americans to be like, where's France on a map, and like pointing at Russia or something. But I understood that for the first time. I understood that if 1,000 miles in one direction and 1,000 miles in the other direction is the United States of America, and either side of that is the ocean, and then before you're getting to the next continental landmass. And I used to sort of mock, how like the Super Bowl winners are called the world champions, but they're the only who play the sport.
World Series as well with baseball.
Exactly. And it's like you sort of started to ring true. And a lot of the people we met, didn't have passports. It's just they've never contemplated leaving the country, because you can be skiing in the Rockies, you can be in the desert in Texas, surfing in Cali, or living the sort of the metropolis life in New York. It's like I said, it's really difficult to talk about it with not drifting into cliche, but the reason those cliches exist is because they're accurate.
Yeah. I mean, what I did really enjoy Joe's coverage of the election. I think I really liked how you would speak to ordinary people, how you speak to so many different people from so many different places, both Trump and Biden supporters. What was that experience like, talking to voters? Just how did it feel? What was it like? I mean,
it was, well, on a professional level, it was much easier. Americans are way less camera shy than Brits are. And I think you can put that down to a couple of things. I think Americans have a much better. I think Americans understand the power of narrative in a way that Brits don't. Like, every American has a really strong sense of their life story, of where they are and what they think about things, and they also sort of, that sort of startup hustler culture. Everyone's talking about everyone we talk to is like telling us about their side hustles. And everyone has an elevator pitch, and they're much more forthcoming. They're much more gregarious. So if you're doing a vox pop in the UK, you maybe get 1 in 10, 2 in 10 people will stop to speak to you. In America, it's inverse, and it's about 8 in 10, 9 in 10 will stop and chat to you. And I think part of that also is they understand the power of media. They understand that if you go viral, that could really be to your benefit. Because they are like the definitive media culture. Also, they just have a much more developed media ecosystem. So, like, they're used to local TV. Like, they still have that. They still have local newspapers. So they're used to journalists being around. They're much more polite as well. It's very rare. It was very rare in America for you to approach someone to speak to them and they like not even acknowledge your existence, which is pretty common if you're vox popping in the UK. In terms of what it revealed, is one of the reasons we did it the way we wanted to is because I'm just so sick of watching often liberal journalists basically berating Trump supporters. Initiating a conversation with one open question, and then from there on it's essentially just a sort of derisory fact check that goes on. And I don't feel that serves any purpose other than to sort of flatter the ego of the journalist that's doing that, or the outlet that's doing it. But it doesn't get any closer to understanding the sort of the political forces that are at work and motivating people to vote in this way. And how can you do anything? Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not like a Trumpist, but how can you confront that and do something about it and challenge it if you don't understand the motivations and where it's coming from? So that's what we tried to do, and led to some pretty extraordinary interactions at times. There was one time we went to a Voters for Trump rally in Florida, and my camera operator, sort of producer who was out there with me as well, Josh Kaplan, he had his mask around his neck. We were outside. We were nowhere near anyone, so he wasn't wearing it. He just had it hung around his neck. And this woman, this Trump supporter, is like, "Why are you wearing that?" She's like, "Why the fuck have you? Why have you got that?" Oh my god! And he's like, "Because there's a pandemic."
Blunt British response.
And she was like, "You wouldn't wear that for the flu," and he was like, "Yeah, but this pandemic isn't the flu." And it's really extraordinary to see how everything is politicized. What we were just talking there about, sort of polarization in terms of our politics. It's not a scratch. It's not a scratch on what goes on in America. It really isn't. The wearing masks became, if you're a Trump supporter, generally, obviously we're talking in generalizations, but if you're a Trump supporter, you don't wear one and you're aggressive towards people that do. And you actually really witnessed that actually as you moved through the South. So we started in Texas, went along the coast, and then made our way up to sort of, New York and Philadelphia. As you sort of progressed up that part of the country, masks start popping up more and more until you get to New York, where everyone's wearing one. Like, even when they're outside, they're nowhere near one. Everyone has them on. And, in the South, it's just wide open. You do what you want. Like, in Atlanta, Georgia, the nightclubs are open. Like, it's just like, do what you want. It's not on us. See fit, and I don't know. But I do think that can inform our experience. I think there's a middle. I really do think there is a middle ground actually to be found between where the UK's COVID response and sort of this total lockdown, house arrest, and then not doing the like totally mental thing of having nightclubs open. I think there's somewhere in between that can be found, and actually being there really, sort of informed my thinking about that.
So my final question on the US, I want to ask about the incident in the Capitol on the 6th of January, where obviously Trump supporters stormed the Capitol. I mean, I must admit that completely shocked me. I'm sure it shocked you as well. I was actually watching an Italian football match, and suddenly I get a text from my friend saying, turn over to the news. You can't believe what's happening in the US. And I was like, well, how bad could it be? And then obviously I turned over, and it was obviously horrific scenes. When you were in the US, I mean, obviously you talked about this divided society. Did you think at any point anything that extreme could happen?
Yes. We did a piece on I would call them far right militia. I think they would accept that label, aspects of it at least anyway. And yeah, this guy, they're called the Georgia 3% Security Force. And Vice have also done a piece on them, and Vice called them the largest right-wing militia in America. And he was very upfront. I mean, he literally said to me, if Trump doesn't win, and I put to him that there are eventualities in which the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, could become the president, at least in the interim. And he literally said, if that happens, I will grab my firearm and I'll be running out the front door screaming like a banshee. Now, I took that with a pinch of salt, because my view of these guys was basically that they liked playing toy soldiers in the woods. They'd left the army, they weren't anymore, and they wanted an excuse to go out and shoot AR-15s at metal targets. Excuse me. So I didn't think he was totally serious. But then he shows up on cable news a couple of days later, like at the count in Georgia with an assault rifle. But, as with a lot of these sort of, Proud Boys, etc., they like to turn up, they like to intimidate, they like to have their assault rifles with them. Whether anything happens or not, it remains to be seen. But no, I mean, look, I'm not going to pretend to you that I foresaw the storming of the heart of American democracy, because my assumption was obviously that the police would stop that sort of thing from happening. Given how Black Lives Matter protests were policed in Washington. When I was in Washington around the election, everything was boarded up. Shops were boarded up. There's security fencing around the White House. There are military helicopters flying over. Like, you're at the political heart of the most, well, not the most militarized society in the world, but a country where there are more guns than people, and the security apparatus that goes alongside that. So whilst you think, look, this could get ugly, and actually we were expecting it to kick off on the night of the election. We were expecting, fortunately, the way things panned out because of mail-in ballots and the protracted 5-day saga that was who's going to win. That sort of meant there was no immediate flashpoint. So on our way into Washington DC, we were like seriously thinking about, okay, it could kick off here, and whether that's Antifa or whether it's sort of Trump people, it could get violent. What are we going to do? What's our sort of limits? What are we comfortable with? How far into this do we want to go? Because it's one thing being at like a far right protest in the UK where it's basically like hooligans who haven't had football matches to go to drinking Stella and throwing traffic cones at police officers. In the US, it's like the protesters have gas masks because they're used to being tear gassed. And it's a serious business when it kicks off there. So we knew there was the potential for violence. We were expecting violence, but I mean, was I expecting to see like a QAnon shaman with like a trapper hat standing on the speaker's chair? No. No, I wasn't expecting that.
Oh my God. I mean, I was going to ask you about you mentioned the police response. I was going to ask you about that. I think I was quite torn at the time because, as you said, we've seen much harsher responses to sort of Black Lives Matter protests and sort of peaceful protests and things like that. But also, I do understand the point that if you're standing there and a bunch of blokes, massive blokes with machine guns run at you, I don't think I'd stand up to them. I'd probably admit I'd straight away just, put my hands up.
Yeah.
I mean, I was quite torn about the police response.
So I don't think I from what I've seen, and I might be wrong on this, but I don't think actually that any of the people that actually entered the Capitol grounds, or at least the physical confines of the building, I didn't see any of those people armed. Now,
okay.
When I say armed, I mean firearms. There were people with zip ties. There are people with bits of whatever furniture that they've ripped up and picked up. I'm not saying that they're like peaceful protesters, because they're not. But although maybe was there that armed standoff? I don't know if one of the photo of all the guys pointing their I don't know if that there was the other person was armed, had a firearm then or not. But for me, it's irrelevant. It's okay if they'd have had guns. I mean, there's no excuse for not seeing this coming. I mean, they were literally talking openly about it on social media. The march was planned in advance, and journalists who are familiar with the subject were literally tweeting months in advance. It's quite possible, if not highly likely, that Trump supporters will try and storm the Capitol on January 6th, I think? Yeah.
6th, yeah, I think it was 6th or 7th. No, it was the 6th, I think.
Yeah. So, they saw it coming. They were under police. They were maybe they didn't see it coming. They should have seen it coming.
Yeah.
They were under-resourced. They didn't have the right police there. Unfortunately, it just doesn't hold up to scrutiny. I think you witness the sort of divide in American society, because it's really difficult, because you don't want to be down on the police, because if you're one of the limited police officers on the streets and you're surrounded by a mob, you're probably thinking about self-preservation. Whilst you may be able to shoot, I don't know, 10 of them, and by the way, I'm not advocating that. If they start firing, I mean, you're going to there's more of them than you have bullets. So I mean, it's not going to end well for you. However, what we saw, the way that the Black Lives Matter protests were policed, which was violently, admittedly not always with lethal force, but sometimes with lethal force.
Yeah.
If black people were literally smashing down the doors to the Capitol, there would be more bodies. You can't. Yeah. There are bodies when they protest peacefully. There are bodies when they're just minding their own business and the cops turn up.
So I do want to talk. I mean, we have briefly mentioned COVID, but I do really want to. Obviously, that's the big story at the moment. It's incredible to think it's now been a year since it sort of first appeared in the news. It's now been 10 months since we went into lockdown originally. It's incredible. So, I just quickly, how would you rate the government's response or just overall performance so far?
I don't know. It's okay. This is really difficult. As previously mentioned, there is no two ways about it. Catastrophic failure in terms of the number of people that have died. Catastrophic failure in terms of in March telling people not to wear face masks, that we're not going to ban mass gatherings. It's really easy to just be like, here's Boris Johnson on the 17th of December saying Keir Starmer wants to cancel Christmas. Here's Boris Johnson on the 19th of December saying we're cancelling Christmas.
Yeah.
That being said, you can't overlook this vaccine program. You can't. It's a remarkable success. Equally, furlough again. There are aspects of this. I guess, like with everything in politics, right? There aren't any easy answers. There's not. Everything that the government's done in relation to this is shite, and there's not a good word to say about them, because there are good words to say about them. But again, you just can't. The death toll, it's damning. Yeah. The economic impact is also damning. Yeah. Worst. It always makes me laugh that it's too early for international comparisons on recession and death toll. But by the way, we are leading. We're doing more vaccinations than all of Europe combined. So
I don't know. Of course, they had comparisons right at the start as well when the cases were lower in the UK than it was on the continent. So
Yeah, but I mean, let's be wary of trying to apply logic to any of this stuff. I mean, it's been appalling. It's been really appalling. You asked me for 1 to 10. I mean, I'll go 3. But crucially, and Tom McTague wrote a brilliant piece in the Atlantic about this, about the importance of endings in our memory, and there is an opportunity here with this vaccination program for the British electorate, the British public, to actually, because of if the defining moment of if it's an amenable conclusion with the releasing of society due to the success of a mass vaccine rollout and medical science more broadly, then it's possible that electorally the Conservatives don't actually suffer that much for this.
Yeah, I think you've read my mind, because that was going to be my next question relating to the opposition and relating to Keir Starmer. Actually, I saw Joe's video, little I don't know what you call it, jokey parody song with Keir Starmer in today. And you asking him for an interview request. I hope he does respond to that positively at some point. But I think. Okay, so how would you rate the opposition's performance, giving the same sort of standard the government?
It's been forensic, Adam. It's been forensic. No, look. For me, the jury's still out on Starmer. There's aspects of him. There's aspects of the way he's behaved that I really don't like. One would be on what was the name of the bill? The security bill, the abstention. The spy cops bill that basically permitted, sort of clemency for agents of the state to sort of commit torture, murder, and sexual violence in the name of sort of protecting the British state. Abstaining on that for me is, sort of a pretty major moral failure. But you can take the sort of the Noam Chomsky position on this, which is, broadly speaking, in terms of sort of left-wing political parties, political options, in the rare case, there's actually very few sort of genuine socialist political options. And therefore, in that regard, your job is not to vote for someone, it's to vote against someone. And if you're sort of a left-wing persuasion, and regardless of whether you think Keir Starmer is a sort of is blue Labour or red Tory or whatever you want to call him, he is still, and again, this is if you're left-wing, but he's an improvement on Boris Johnson. It's really tough because you have to try and turn Labour into an electorally successful machine, which historically they're just not. So, that's a serious undertaking. I mean, do I think the politics? Because the obvious comparison is Blair, right? It's the sort of the third way centrist, the last Labour Prime Minister, and that is obviously probably the primary parallel that you would draw to Keir Starmer. I don't know. I think because there's also this question of what does he actually think? What's his position on this stuff?
Yeah.
And actually, if I was advising him, I would urge caution in terms of, because it's often a game of the right wing media is sort of well, what does Labour think about Y? What does Keir Starmer actually think about X? And well, in reality, that obligation is very rarely placed on conservative governments or leaders. Beyond an election manifesto, that's really the only time you get it in writing that we think about X, Y, and Z, and then how much of it actually turns out to be true, and how much of it is deliverable. So I think, in terms of PMQs, what's that an indicator of? He obviously does a pretty good job of looking stern and making Boris look quite unsettled, but that's his sort of.
I think he goes for the sort of the safe lawyer approach,
Yeah.
which I think works.
Yeah.
It's a good debating tactic.
Yeah, and especially as well, which I think it is, one of your major political concerns, or one of the things you have to bridge, is making Labour look like a competent political party, because that unfortunately was the problem for Corbyn's Labour. It was viewed as sort of error-prone, error-stricken, a walking calamity.
Yeah.
And so I think a product of that is going to be sort of this managerialism of, I have a nice suit, I don't raise my voice, I sound intelligent, I have a grasp of the detail, I hold my pen like this and I pointed at you from across the dispatch box. So that there has to be an element of that from him.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I would agree with you that the jury is still out on Keir Starmer. For me, I feel like he's missed a bit. I think he's missed an open goal here. I think with the pandemic, from a political perspective, I don't think he's been hard enough on the mistakes the government's made. And for that reason, I think the polls have stayed relatively even. And now you're saying about the ending, the vaccine is going incredibly well. It's been a very successful rollout. I think now it's going to be seen as, well, the Conservatives were the heroes. They're the heroes of the story. And the Labour Party was sort of just, they were just there, I guess, not really doing much.
It's a possibility. I mean, look, I don't, particularly for sort of my peers. I mean, the idea that Boris Johnson won a landslide majority was just sort of unconscionable. It's sort of like, so as one of my colleagues put it on our election night coverage, like, do we just live in a right-wing country? Like, is the UK just right-wing? Is it just conservative? I think electorally, I think you could probably say so. I mean,
or England, I would say.
Yeah, certainly England. Yeah, I don't know.
It's just a case of wait and see. I guess that's all we can do. For the sake.
Sorry,
go on.
Sorry, Adam, but your point is totally valid. I mean, how anyone can look at. I think it was one poll. I think it was one YouGov poll last week put Labour like 4 points ahead of the Tories, but that's not. That's not.
Yeah, I think that's gone up and down throughout the pandemic.
It's like, roughly speaking, they're basically neck and neck. Yeah. And I mean, if you're the opposition at a time like this, and that's the story, I mean, you cannot be impressed. You cannot be happy. You're going to be picked. If you're in the shadow cabinet, you're a backbench MP. The people who put Keir Starmer in power because they thought that he would play well with the electorate, to be in this position, and for them still to be only neck and neck, it's not going to plan right now.
Yeah. So, for the sake of political fairness, I'm just wondering, have any of the other smaller parties, the Lib Dems, SNP, Green, have they made any impression on you throughout this process? It's fine if they haven't. You can be honest.
During the coronavirus process, during the coronavirus pandemic. I mean, Nicola Sturgeon obviously was sort of viewed very favourably as being, having a better grasp on things. But if you look, for example, at the vaccine rollout, Scotland is way behind. I mean, the SNP's record on health is not great. And they've been in government up there for a long time. Look at something like drug deaths, for example. I mean, and that I wouldn't say they have a fantastic record of governance. I mean, does anyone care what the Lib Dems think? No. I think that's one of their problems, is they don't really have that many ideas. I like the Greens. I like listening to Caroline Lucas. I think she's interesting. I think she's engaging. But I mean, good luck trying to get people to listen to your views on how there should be a green recovery from coronavirus. It's when we're all still stuck in our houses. The SNP is the interesting one for me.
So I did my I did my master's dissertation on Scottish independence, and I'm doing my PhD on independence movements. So the SNP is always one that I always like to keep an eye on for obvious reasons.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think there's going to? So do you think there'll be a referendum this year then?
I don't know. I've given up making political predictions. I don't do it anymore because it's
a loser's game.
I mean, it's so hard to. I mean, I suspect no, because I just don't see Boris Johnson giving one. Maybe he will. I mean, I don't know. He's so hard to predict, I think, as the sort of politician he is.
Do you think they would? Do you think they'd wildcat it like the Catalans?
No, because they want to get into the EU, and as we've seen from the Catalan experience, well, firstly, it's very difficult to get independence after you. Because I did my undergrad thesis on Catalan independence, so I'm also quite aware of that case as well. But yeah, I just think if they were to do that, there's no way the Spanish would let them join the EU, and that's if they could even achieve independence by doing that. And there's no indication that any UN member state, minus a few of the nutty ones with crazy dictator leaders, there's no evidence that anyone over those will back them. So I don't know. I think it's very hard to tell. I think obviously again, I don't like making predictions, but I think based on the polls, I think we will either see an SNP majority, or we will see an SNP and because obviously the Greens are pro-independence as well in Scotland. We will see a pro-independence majority unless something completely crazy happens in the next 5 months or whenever it is. Is it 5? Yeah, 5 months, 4 months.
Don't rule it out.
Yeah. So finally, I'm really curious what you think from a journalist perspective on COVID. I guess I've got really 2 questions. Firstly, practically speaking, obviously I know you have done in-person interviews during this year, but obviously quite a lot of the stuff you've had to do via Skype, via Zoom, whatever your particular program is that you prefer. How different has that been in reality to interview people from an online perspective?
Oh, it's nowhere near as good. I mean, it's just, I actually think we've done quite a good job of it, but you just end up sort of, you start saying something and then you stop and then the other person stops and then it's like, oh, go on.
Yeah, the camera cuts out and you don't know what's going on.
Yeah, no, to be fair, in terms of internet connection, I've actually been pretty blessed that I haven't had anyone who's had a really, really bad one. No, it's just more the lag and sort of, you can't have the same because you can't pick up on the non-verbal cues. You can't, it's really difficult to have like a proper forthright discussion. Particularly as an interviewer, it's really difficult to get beyond, okay, here are my questions, and following them off on tangents or doing follow-ups is really, really hard because it's really hard to cut. I don't actually cut in or interject on subjects a lot anyway. One of the first things I learned or sort of picked up about journalism is first of all, no one really cares what you think, so you should let your subject should let your subject do the talking. But it's also, if you're just silent, if you don't say anything, people will just keep talking, and often actually,
I found something similar.
Talk out enough rope to hang themselves if that's what you're what you're trying to achieve. That's always been my approach. But if let's say we're doing this sort of Zoom thing, and you wanted to ask me about something that I said about 2 minutes ago, well, it's quite a disjointed experience for a Skype viewer to then have to circle back to that. But there's no substitute for in person. There isn't.
Yeah, I'm hoping. Obviously, I started this show in the COVID world, so I'm really hoping once we get out of COVID to actually, hopefully, go to Scotland for the election. But I doubt that's going to happen at this rate. We'll see. We'll see. Yeah. So my final question is, looking at the media's coverage of the pandemic overall, I guess not just the print journalism, but online as well, online media coverage. How would you rate it overall? How would you say? Do you think it's been a relatively fair coverage? Do you think it's been, I guess, good's a word, but you know what I mean? Has it been a good coverage?
Yeah. I don't think it's been great. I think often the media coverage is basically either, depending on where we are nationally, has either been, why aren't you locking down the country? Look at all this data. Or when are you going to unlock the country? It's largely in 2 parts. Also, we've seen one of the downsides of having this lobby-centric media ecosystem is that, you've got people that really had very little understanding of, and by the way, I'm not pretending to be like a PhD, biologist, but, you've got people who have only ever known sort of political reporting, questioning the government about sort of mutant strains of coronavirus and things like that. And I think it goes to show. I think that we've been poorer for that. Like I think science journalists. I think big media companies should have really put up science journalists, as if the political journalist is the only one that's capable of asking a difficult question of a prime minister. The BBC actually has been pretty good. They've put Hugh Pym in for a lot of those presses. There's been some really good stuff. I mean, it's the mainstream of data. It's the mainstream of information, particularly because very few of us are actually talking to each other in person. It's where a lot of us are getting our information from. It's how we're staying abreast of things. It's how we watch the briefings. It's how we find out how many people have died. It's doing a brilliant job in terms of that. Same complaints I would usually make, sort of particularly print media after 100k deaths. Instead of, there were two broad themes, weren't there, when that happened? There was sort of the more left-wing papers had sort of, it was, montage of faces on the front cover and, 100,000 dead. And then the sort of right-wing press was a bit more of a fawning Boris Johnson sort of, I'm so sorry, type of thing. And it's like, do you really need to be like rehabilitating the character of the prime minister today? But those gripes are tale as old as time, really.
I was going to say, I think sadly that didn't surprise me at all, that sort of approach, just because that's just how it is, I think, which is a sad way, probably a bit of a sad way to end. But Oli Dugmore, thank you so much for your time. It's been a really, really interesting conversation, and I really appreciated it. Thank you.
No, thank you, Adam. I appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye. Hi guys, thank you for watching this latest episode of PhD-Politico Discussions. If you enjoyed this video, then please don't forget to give it a like. And if you want to watch more content like this, then please do subscribe. Bye guys.